With Storware Backup and Recovery, one can protect multiple different platforms. My name is Marcin Kubacki, I'm Chief Software Architect at Storware, and today we are going to talk about Nutanix. As you probably know, Nutanix is a hyper-converged infrastructure. So usually you would have to buy a separate physical machine for compute and install some kind of hypervisor so that you would be able to host user virtual machines. Then you would attach storage, and the storage would be attached over some kind of SAN network with some controllers, FC switches and so on. Now in the hyper-converged world, you just purchase a box. It looks basically like a server, so a set of servers that will have storage inside. They will have controller virtual machines that will actually provide you some kind of storage-defined, software-defined storage, and network, in this case Ethernet network, which is actually a core of this solution because all of the data is going to travel across Ethernet network. So you scale both compute and storage at the same time by adding multiple boxes. Now these boxes are called blocks in Nutanix, and inside each box you will have nodes, so physical servers, so separate hypervisors. In the hyperconverged infrastructure by Nutanix, you will have these Nutanix service VMs. They are called CVMs, and these will actually be the place where all of the data traffic is going through, and it also provides an abstraction over hypervisors. So you don't have to use specific. Well, in the Nutanix, actually KVM based called Acropolis are going to be the very specific hypervisors that are going to be used. But in the past also we have seen the Nutanix on the VMware and Hyper-V. And the storage also is abstracted through these service VMs. When we say Nutanix Acropolis, we actually relate to this layer at the bottom of the picture. You see the hypervisor level with the distributed storage fabric and app mobility fabric. Two components which technically abstract hypervisor and abstract the storage. And on top of that you are able to build volumes virtual machines containers. Now, to manage everything, you have a component called Prism, which also is hosted inside the same virtual machine. Nutanix AHVA hypervisor actually is based on the KVM. So QEMU actually abstracts the hardware for your guest operating systems, and one of the virtual machines on every hypervisor is going to be CVM. That comes from Nutanix and is responsible for all of the I operations in this case. When we talk about storage in Nutanix, a group of physical devices forms a storage pool. And then you can create containers, so data stores actually. And these containers are usually the vDisks, host vDisks that are attached to your virtual machine. So that's typical, like VMDK, for instance, in the VMware world. You also are able to connect virtual machine virtual volume groups, but volume groups are a separate concept in terms of the backup. Volume groups actually are created separately from the storage provider menu, and you scan for them and create groups of vDisks that are later able to attach to individual virtual machines. You can share them actually using this mechanism, so it's useful for building shared storage. However, from the backup perspective, those are not visible, so you have a separate tab in Storware Backup and Recovery called Storage, and then you are able to scan and backup volume groups. One very important aspect from the Nutanix is actually how the storage is accessed, because when you have a virtual machine running on the specific hypervisor, it reads and writes blocks, and usually if your virtual machine uses specific blocks very often, they will be kept on the, let's say, the same hypervisor. However, they need to be replicated. So every time you write something, the block also needs to be replicated to the other nodes in the cluster. In case of the migration or failure scenarios, now your virtual machine resides on a different hypervisor, so every time it actually needs to read a block, it needs to go through the controller VM of the other hypervisors where this block resides. If the failure occurs, the blocks are instantly being replicated from the other nodes that are still alive, and to match the specific number of replicas that are the requirement for the cluster. This is very important from the node placement when we talk about Storware Backup and Recovery. Node, as a data mover, it actually creates snapshots and attaches them to the proxy virtual machine. So proxy virtual machine will reside on one of the nodes. And this means that whenever we read data, we would actually hit blocks that are non-present on this specific hypervisor, and they would need to be fetched from the other hypervisors. Optionally, that's an option, you can actually deploy multiple nodes inside the virtual machines. And those virtual machines would be actually one per hypervisor. Now, once you have such scenario deployed, you will have separate nodes with separate node configurations, and you can override that for the specific hypervisor. You will use specific node configuration with this single node. This would actually mean that all of the virtual machines later that reside on the specific hypervisor will be backed up by the specific node that also resides on the same hypervisor, and you would actually focus on the blocks that reside specifically on this host without the need to transfer data back and forth between the nodes in the cluster. Now, you can connect Storware Backup and Recovery to the Prism, and actually you can connect to the Prism Central or Prism Element. And the Prism Element is inside all of these CVMs in your cluster, so on all of the nodes. But notice that Prism Central actually connects to all of them. During the backup, both Prism Central and Prism Element has to be used if you would like to connect via Prism Central. So it's not a single place actually that is able to provide the same APIs for backup procedures. Prism Central is being used as an entry point to locate virtual machine and appropriate Prism element, which later we are able to target requests and backup specific virtual machine. Prism element usually is focused around the specific cluster, and Prism Central actually shows all of the data across multiple clusters in your data center. Nutanix provides also the replication, built-in replication, and there are a few concepts that you need to be aware. So one is protection domain, and this is a group of virtual machines actually replicated together. That's the general concept, but you can also have consistency group. And consistency group is that the groups of the VMs and files need to be protected in a crash consistent manner, so they will be snapshotted together and replicated according to its obviously replication schedule and replication policy. Now the question is actually sometimes that we hear from the customers if we are able to use backups when we have this replication mechanism on, and the answer is yes, but you can also refer to the Nutanix documentation because it varied over the version that were actually supported. Nutanix also provides Nutanix files. Nutanix files is a file server, so we can deploy such file server and host data, actually provide shares, so storage for your files, over NFS and SMB. And with Storware Backup and Recovery, you also are able to protect such shares. You just need to provide access both to your Prism element and specific file server. So once you have a connection to both, we are able to create snapshot, fetch information about what has changed, so also support change file tracking, and then fetch data. Few concepts that we need to address here is that when you see Storware Backup and Recovery user interface, when we talk about Nutanix Prism Central or Prism Element, you actually have to add Hypervisor Manager. If you can add individual Prism elements, or you can just add Prism Central and we will have all of the information needed. When hypervisor and hypervisor cluster corresponds actually to Nutanix node, like hypervisor, and cluster, so the same. Hypervisor storage equals storage container. And now when we talk about the volume groups, which are not being backed up during regular virtual machine backup, you add a volume group storage provider, and then we scan for instances of the storage. So in case of the volume groups, so that is going to be individual instance of the storage. Volume group with all of the disks inside this volume group. For the Nutanix files, it's worth also to mention that in this case, individual shares will be storage instances. With Prism Central, you are able also to scan for projects and, by the way, tags as well, and that helps you later to resort to the specific project if you need to. During the backup of the virtual machines, so we are talking strictly here about the Acropolis hypervisor, you have to deploy proxy virtual machine inside which you need to deploy Storware Backup and Recovery node. And node actually creates snapshots, attaches the drives, and is able to read the data directly from the volumes. Then the data is being transferred to some backup destination. It can be shared, obviously. With the incremental backups, we support change block tracking, or rather change region tracking. That's how it's called in the Nutanix, so that it definitely boosts up the overall transfer rate during the backup. The same applies actually to volume groups, with the small difference that it doesn't have to be inside the same cluster, because volume groups are backed up via the iSCSI, so in this case we are able to be outside of the cluster. For the Nutanix files, the architecture is in this case similar, but remember that is also a network-based backup, so it doesn't have to be the virtual machine strictly with the node. It doesn't have to be inside the cluster. We will mount the shares over the network, and we will be able to download data directly, in this case over the network, without the need to be inside the cluster. But usually when we talk about protecting Nutanix, we have all of them bounded together, so we'll deploy multiple proxy virtual machines inside your clusters, and at the same time we will just back up both volume groups and Nutanix files as well. Here you can see that the shares here shown by the specific file server are later actually storage instances in the user interface. Change file tracking, CFT, is also supported for Nutanix files, so during the backup we will have option to fetch information which files have been changed and download the data only of those that have been changed. It's also worth to mention Nutanix Objects. Nutanix Objects is another service that is hosted inside the Nutanix. From our perspective, it's not the source, it's rather a target, because Storware Backup and Recovery supports S3 compatible storage as well. So you could technically back up to the Nutanix Objects your data. Now let's do the demo. First step is to logging into the admin console. And inside the virtual environments tab, you will see two main tabs actually, instances and virtualization providers. Virtualization provider is the place where you add Nutanix Prism. And when you add them here using this drop down, you can specify Nutanix Prism, and you specify node configuration for whole Nutanix environment. I mean, whole from the virtual environment's perspective. So this means that it is going to be automatically propagated to your individual hypervisors, but you can later override that for specific needs, like multiple nodes inside the same cluster. The URL you provide in here, it can be either element or prism central, depending on your scenario. Once you have added and run inventory synchronization, you will see multiple instances in here. So the instances will appear. I have one node deployed in here. And as I mentioned earlier, if you would like to override that on the cluster, you see here that I have one hypervisor only, but you could have multiple, and this is the place where you are able to change the node configuration for individual hypervisors. So all of the virtual machines residing on this hypervisor would be backed up by the node config, so all of the nodes, in this case probably one, node inside this node config. Now let's run backup. Now this process may also use application consistent snapshot. So inside the backup policies, when you have backup policy, you can go to the backup process, and there is a quiet freeze before snapshot option. This tries to use application consistent snapshot, which requires tools installed inside the each of the virtual machines. So guest tools needs to be installed, and only then, when we call application consistent snapshot, Nutanix will deliver us application consistent snapshot, so probably freeze file systems, or maybe run some hooks inside your guest operating system like QoS database and so on. Then we are doing, the snapshot is being done, and such snapshot is going to be definitely more consistent. However, if that fails, we will fall back to the crash consistent anyway. So you will see some warning that the backup has been done, but unfortunately it was only using the crash consistent technology. When you go to the details of the virtual machine, you will also notice snapshots. So you may be wondering why I'm leaving snapshots on the hypervisor if the change block tracking is implemented. And that's how the Nutanix delivers change block tracking. So during the change block tracking or change region tracking query, you actually, when you are querying those snapshots, you will have to specify 2 points in time, so actually snapshot IDs, and you will have a list of change regions, and that's why the snapshots are being automatically rolled by the Storware Backup and Recovery during this backup process. Okay, in the task console we see that the backup has already been finished, so now you can see that your backup is up to date and you are able to restore. So you can restore directly to the virtualization provider and specify optionally other virtualization providers. So if you would like to restore cross hypervisors, then you are able to do that. So the same let's say you have two Nutanix Prism elements or Prism centrals and you would like to restore across them. Let's specify the name, the storage, so we can specify which storage container you would like to actually address during the backup recovery, and those volumes listed in here are only those that previously have been backed up directly from the regular storage container, not from volume group. Networking, for each of the network interface cards you need to specify network, and optionally you can power on after restore. Restore task has been submitted. For the Nutanix we also support file level recovery and sharing drives over iSCSI, so you would actually be able to directly mount these volumes inside, let's say, Windows guest to preserve file level permissions and dump only the files, copy the files that you need, and preserve file permissions because Windows would interpret them correctly. So that's an additional advantage if you have such scenario. And also recovery plans are supported, so you could have batch recovery for multiple virtual machines supported as well. Now in the storage tab for Nutanix you will find two storage providers that you may be interested in. First one is Nutanix Volume Groups, It doesn't require any additional setup because technically you already have volume groups in your environment, so your data services are up and running, and you just need to provide the Prism element credentials, and you will be able to scan for the individual volume groups. That's what I see in here. And another storage provider that is supported is the Nutanix files. Nutanix files in this case actually requests from us two types of credentials. One is to the individual file server, and the other one is for Prism element. Now the Nutanix files obviously would again need to be would require inventory synchronization process, and during the backup we would be able to mount the data and snapshot the actual Nutanix files share, copy the data, and later push it to the backup destination. In terms of snapshotting, in the Nutanix world, we support snapshot management policies as well. Snapshot management for virtual environments reside in here, and the cool thing about snapshot policies for the Nutanix specifically is that because this is a software-defined storage, they will not affect significantly the performance. So you can actually enhance your backup with these snapshots just by doing, let's say, extra 2 snapshots during the day without exporting them. And if you need to enhance your recovery point objective, that would actually mean that you are able to roll back to the given snapshot without the need to download the data from the storage provider. Snapshot management is also supported for the Nutanix volume groups. Let's log into my Prism console. And inside the virtual machine tab, notice that I have my 2 virtual machines and the one that has already been restored. The storage that I have mentioned resides in here, so you have the volume group, and also you have the file servers tab if you would like to deploy file servers. As you have seen, with Storware Backup and Recovery, you can cover not only virtual machines with data protection, but also your volume groups and Nutanix files. The key advantage here is actually that all of that what was actually shown in this demo, you're able also to store inside multiple different backup destinations. That covers obviously file system, where we also support synthetic backup destination, but you can use object storage, like S3 or some cloud storage, or external backup providers such as IBM's, Dell's, Veritas, and so on. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the other videos.